Hello everyone, welcome to week 2 of these creepy automotive stories. I hope you enjoyed the first week. This week's stories will be coming from a website called Top Speed. We're only going to be doing 3 stories today because, well, they were the 3 best. But without boring you with details, let's just get into them right now. This first story was written by Kirby. When I was young, I used to live in this place near a street called Bullet Drive. You can Google the street, but the gist of this story is that I saw something I shouldn't have, and the memory of it still creeps into my head to this day. It was 1992, and my cousins and I had just finished watching a late-night showing of Beauty and the Beast. I was 8 years old at that time, and some of my older cousins thought it would be funny to scare the younger ones on the way home. So they took us to Bullet Drive in our grandmother's brand new Mitsubishi L300 van, and they thought it'd be funny if they intentionally stalled the car in the middle of this haunted street. Needless to say, some of my younger cousins and I were spooked to the point that we were all crying. Knowing that they had gone too far, the older ones apologized and said that they were just messing with us and we'd all go home now. The only problem was, the van, a brand new one at that, wouldn't start anymore. At first, we thought that they were just messing around again. But then they too started getting scared. And then, something slammed into the roof of the van like a body falling from the skies. None of us saw it, but the thud was loud enough to have caused a dent in the roof. Immediately, we all get out and run the few blocks back to our house, leaving the van there in the street for somebody to take. My cousins and I couldn't sleep the rest of the night, and as soon as dawn broke, we all returned to the van. Not only was it starting again, but the van was completely fine. No dents on the roof. No, nothing. To this day, none of us who were there that night have an explanation for what happened, and none of us have talked about it for a long time. The second story was written by Mark. In the days before high school kids had cell phones, my buddy and I were driving his early 90s Nissan hardbody pickup through the dark woods of southern Mississippi on our way to a camping trip. His truck was slightly built, just right for a kid with little sense of self-preservation. Tall, skinny mud tires rode under a modest body lift with a rusty frame in between. About 2 hours from our destination, we were tooling along at 65 miles per hour down a desolate 2-lane highway, jamming out to terrible early 2000s music, when the rev suddenly shut up on the Nissan's 2.4-liter 4-cylinder. Jabbing the throttle made noise but didn't translate into forward movement. We had lost 5th gear. Downshifting the 5-speed manual transmission into 4th kept the truck moving, but it too soon was non-existent. Left with 3rd as the highest gear, we kept pushing on, closer to camp and the safety of my friend's uncle's place. But the dark highway seemed to have a hold over the truck, as 3rd soon let go as well. Left with only 1st and 2nd, we decided to pull over at a rundown convenience store long since closed. The truck sat dead near the edge of the road, bleeding transmission fluid from its bowels onto the dirt like a murder victim. A dim streetlight was our only light source. We made it out alive, thanks to a local and his cell phone, but for several hours we were completely stranded in what looked like the set of a horror movie. The third story is written by Robert. As a state and ASE certified master mechanic, I've seen some pretty wild things. Insane DIY fixes that will make your stomach turn. Think vacuum hoses being used to replace brake lines, and vehicles that were so poorly maintained that they had no business being on the road. Well, one of the worst cases I have ever seen in the time I've spent wrenching was a 1982 Ford Bronco. The customer came into the shop, said the brakes weren't performing well and were making noise. It's a pretty common complaint, but you never take a customer's word for it. So I proceeded to take a quick test drive to verify the customer's complaint. Sure enough, the brakes, well, they literally sucked. But little did I know, that was the least of the problems. I don't know who was more ignorant, the vehicle or the owner, but once I pulled this thing into the shop, and got to putting it on a lift, I was disturbed that I even took a chance driving this thing down the road. The frame rails were practically non-existent, and to be honest, the only thing holding the whole thing together was the body itself, which was mounted to the sheet of rust that was once a frame. I've dealt with plenty of vehicles that weren't capable of being put on a lift. I've even seen a couple of them fold in half because they were rotted so bad, so I knew right away there was no lifting this thing by the usual means. Of course, some people refuse to let a vehicle die, either out of stubbornness or lack of finances to procure another, and this specific customer happened to be one. They still wanted the brakes inspected, so I loosened the lugs on one wheel and very carefully used a floor jack up on one corner. The body flexed pretty bad, but to my surprise, nothing broke. However, what was waiting behind that wheel was the scariest part of all. Imagine my surprise when I pulled the wheel off to see the spooky, rusted remains of what was once a rotor. It was worn so badly that the inboard side of the rotor was completely gone, and the steel backing plate of the last had worn through the cooling fans and into the backside of the outboard friction surface. The rotor itself, if that's what you would call it at this point, was no more than a quarter of an inch thick at best. The other side was just as bad. Oh, and the customer? Yeah, they refused to pay for new pads and rotors and requested we let him leave with it. And in the great state of Michigan, we're not legally able to hold onto anyone's vehicle if it is unsafe. We just have to report it. The customer drove off as the old Bronco tweaked and twisted but didn't break. The boys showed up a few minutes later, but were unable to locate the man with the Bronco that wouldn't quit. Talk about freaky.